how to deal with writer's block?
Ooh, good question. Well, I think that probably depends on what type of writer you are. So if you're more intuitive, right? If you like to sit down and let it flow and let the muse come to you and stuff like that, I would say there's probably activities that make you feel more inspired. Sorry, I'm going to grab water really quick if
Okay,
that's
yeah, of
okay.
course. Go ahead.
um,
Stay hydrated.
yeah, so I think there's probably activities that are inspiring to you, right? I always think the things that make me feel inspired about movies are watching really good movies. So if you're
Mm,
feeling
mhm.
writer's block, I know some people say don't watch other movies because you'll end up borrowing from,
Yeah.
those stories, but I don't think that's necessarily true. I think watch things that get you excited about movies again so that your wheels start turning and you start getting those, little sparks of inspiration that you can then build on, right? And hopefully it's a
Mm,
snowball effect and that gets you going, but then you can start and keep going, right? If you're a more like technical writer, if you think about things like from the angle of a puzzle, it's very it's almost like building with Legos or something. Like I
yeah.
like to put all the pieces in place. Then I would say maybe that's the kind of situation where you'd like to talk it out with someone so that you can work through the puzzle with a sounding board, right? So if
Mm,
you're stuck, if that's the type of writer you are and you're feeling like, oh, I can't figure out this puzzle on my own, maybe it's helpful to have a sounding board and you can say, okay, here's what I'm trying to build. Here are the pieces I have. Ask me questions about it, or what do you think of this? Does this work? Is there anything that you can see here that's not working? So basically, short answer I think is I always look for activities you can do that will kind of meet you where you are as a writer, like the type of writer you are. Find things that get you over that hump, whatever that sticking point is that you are finding yourself with. Find an activity that sort of makes it fun to get past that, so it doesn't feel like you're sitting in front of the computer, slamming your head against the
mm,
keyboard just to get your story out.
yeah. What do you think about starting a new project? If you hit a writer's block, starting a new project until you feel that inspiration again for the other project?
Yeah. Well, so I think that's okay. You have to get to know yourself as a writer and ask yourself if you're just jumping from project to project endlessly, right?
Mm,
Because I do think that that's a concern, especially if you are if you're in the process of learning how to write a screenplay, right? It's going to feel difficult at times. It's going to
mm,
feel challenging and uncomfortable. And I think it's very common to have that instinct of like, oh, well, this clearly isn't working. And I have this other idea that in my head, it's perfect. Like this other shiny idea that one seems so much easier and doesn't have any of the problems of this one that I'm working on. So I'm going to go work on that one instead. Right. And while I think that can keep you moving, right? So it can keep you from getting stuck on one project and never making progress. I would just be careful that that's not what you do continuously so that you never finish a project, right?
mm.
Because, I think you learn so much from finishing your screenplay rather than just starting a bunch of screenplays.
Yeah, yeah. Totally makes sense. I think for me especially, I've tried a few different models of not just in writing, but for work in general, any kind of creative work. Where, for example, I would tell myself, okay, I'm going to write 1 hour every single day, or I'm going to write 4 hours once a week, or something like that. Ton of different models. For me personally, I find that forcing myself to be creative typically burns me out and leads me in a position like writer's block.
Mm-hmm. So do you have a solution that works for you? Do you have something that you
Not
go
yet.
to? Not yet.
No.
Well, you just said though that forcing yourself to be creative is not the answer. So that's where I think, okay, maybe there is a solution that's sort of the opposite of that, right? So I have worked with writers before who were like, I have writer's block. It's almost like a perpetuating cycle now, a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? Like I sit down and I know I have writer's block, so then I just have more writer's
Mm,
block.
yeah.
And so I think for that, maybe give yourself like a week where you're not going to write at all, or however long you have to devote to this exercise,
Mm,
right? 2 weeks, not writing at all. I'm not going to allow myself to write. And I bet during that time, in your day to day, like when you're in the shower, when you're walking the dog or whatever, the ideas will start to come to you and you'll start to get excited about getting back to your project again,
Yeah.
you know?
It's typically, for me at least, I really will find a lot of excitement for a project, and I'll go all in, just go crazy with it, and then I crash completely, and then I need a long time, like, just away from it to find that spark of excitement back again.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think we've all been there with projects. It's like any project I've ever any screenplay I've ever worked on, there always comes a point where you just hate it. You know what I
Mm,
mean? Where you're just like, I don't like this at all anymore. I don't like anything
yeah.
about it. I don't like any of the characters. I don't like my writing, all of that. And that is challenging because it's like, how do you fall back in love with your own work, right?
Mm,
Um, and that's what I think it's about. It's like it's finding ways to rekindle that romance. So whether it's going back to what you loved about it to begin with, like whatever that spark of inspiration was originally, sometimes remembering that can make you fall in love with it again. That's why I always tell people, like, when you first get that excited idea, like write down everything you love about it and then put that away so that when you have those moments where you're like,
yeah.
this is terrible, I don't want to write this anymore, you can go back to that. And it's almost like a letter to yourself from the
Yeah.
past of like, here's everything you love about this
Yeah.
project, don't forget about those things. And that
Ah,
can get you excited again,
that's a good exercise to try. That's
Yeah.
really cool.